Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. A genetically modified organism, GMO, or genetically engineered organism, is an organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. This engineered genetic material is then transferred into an organism like corn or soybeans or livestock like dairy cattle or chickens, giving them modified or novel genes. GMOs are used in biological and medical research, production of pharmaceutical drugs, experimental medicine, and agriculture. Proponents of genetically modified organisms in the agricultural industry argue GMO food crops have been genetically altered to have shorter growing cycles, greater resistance to both insects and disease, higher yields, and higher nutritional value. GMO animals have increased production as well. For example, dairy cows may produce more milk. The World Health Organization states that the higher yields afforded by GMO plants and animals may allow food prices to drop while food sources become more abundant. Opponents of GMO foods raise two concerns regarding their safety: the introduction of new allergens and the creation of antibiotic-resistant pathogens, sometimes called superbugs. Because sun, wind, water, birds, and insects are not bound by property lines, there is concern that cross-pollination may occur between GMO crops and non-GMO crops in the vicinity. Certainly for the farmer who has chosen to grow non-GMO foods, this would be seen as a great disadvantage. On this episode of The Conspiracy Show, we explore the pros and cons of genetically modified organisms. We'll meet several critics of genetically engineered plants and animals who insist giant corporations that produce GMOs are hell-bent on monopolizing the Earth's food supply at great risk to human health. We'll meet a big fan of genetically engineered plants and animals who says the giant corporations that produce genetically engineered plants and animals are hell-bent on feeding the planet. Me? I just want the truth. Pure organic truth. And I'm willing to follow it wherever it leads. It is time to redefine reality.
The process of genetically engineering a crop, inserting a gene and cloning it into a plant, causes massive collateral damage in the DNA and create all sorts of changes in the production of proteins. Most of the genetically engineered crops are treated with Roundup herbicide. They're called Roundup-ready crops. The Roundup was originally patented as a broad-spectrum chelator. It grabs nutrients and doesn't let it go. Most livestock in Canada eat Roundup-ready crops. There's now a universal deficiency of nutrients in the animals eating these crops. And because there's a lot of Roundup in the crops, we eat that, and that can chelate the nutrients out of our system, making them less available. So it's a perfect storm for nutrient deficiency, and on top of that, the Roundup which we eat is toxic and now linked to cancer, to Parkinson's disease, to birth defects, and to hormone disruption, among others.
What are GMOs?
That stands for gene-manipulated organism. Any organism whose genetic code has been altered by inserting a gene from another organism. For example, if you had a tomato plant and you genetically introduced into the germplasm of the tomato some genes from a carrot, you might come out with an orange tomato. Most of the genetically engineered crops is being used by one or two very large corporations, multinationals, which have dollar signs in their eyes, and they just are being extremely reckless in the way they're introducing their products.
This whole idea of having vilified Monsanto to that extent, to me, is unjustified. Just like any other company, Monsanto does some wrong things and many right things, But it is not the great devil that has set out to destroy civilization. This is not a case of some seed company saying, gee, we have developed this seed, it's drought resistant, I think we'll sell it to farmers. That's not how it works. It is a very, very long and tedious approval process. And the government keeps coming back, asking for more information until they are satisfied that the benefits outweigh the risk.
The person in charge of policy at the FDA, when GMO policy was evaluated and created, was the former attorney to Monsanto, Michael Taylor. And he claimed that the agency wasn't aware of any information showing that the foods created by these new methods differ from other foods in any meaningful or uniform way, end quote. And that quote was a lie. 44,000 secret internal FDA memos were made public from a lawsuit, showing that in fact the overwhelming consensus among the scientists at the FDA thought that GMOs were not only different, but dangerous. They had repeatedly urged their superiors to require long-term study, but were ignored and their warnings were denied. Michael Taylor then became Monsanto's vice president, and he's now the US food safety czar.
Well, Monsanto is about a $12 billion corporation based in St. Louis, Missouri. They either developed or acquired quite a few companies that had invested in developing GMOs. We're really playing God by creating organisms that weren't developed through normal evolutionary means. And we really don't know what the downsides are. For some, there might not be any. In others, we might change the ecosystem. We might create substances that would be deleterious to human health. We don't know what the downsides are, but what we're starting to learn is that these unique organisms and some of that DNA is ending up in our bloodstream in the human species. But that's why so many people are turning to organics, because they're really trying to opt out of subjecting their family and children to being uncompensated guinea pigs for the biotechnology industry.
The government keeps coming back, asking for more information until they are satisfied that the benefits outweigh the risk. And that, of course, is always the key, whether or not the benefits outweigh the risk. Because no matter what, you can never guarantee a risk-free life.
Almost all processed food contains genetically engineered material today, because almost all processed food either contains corn, sweeteners derived from corn, soy protein isolate. So if you're eating food that's not certified organic, you almost have to assume it's contaminated with novel genetic material.
Essentially, everything that we eat is somehow genetically modified. You know, when you take pollen from one plant and sprinkle it on the other, what you're doing is mixing the genetics of those two plants to get a new hybrid, right? When we have babies, we're doing genetic modification. We're taking genes from the mother and the father, mixing them together and see what the product is. Sometimes the product is good, sometimes the product is not so good.
Study done at Sherbrooke Hospital found in 2011 that 93% of pregnant women had the Bt toxin produced from Monsanto's corn circulating in their blood. An insecticide designed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them was in the blood of 93% of pregnant women and 80% of their unborn fetuses. Now, the biotech industry claim that Bt toxin is destroyed during digestion. This study proves it does not. The Bt toxin was exposed to human cells. It poked holes into those cells, causing leakage in the same kind of way that it might be killing insects. Now consider this, if we're eating the Bt toxin, we're exposing our intestines to something that might be poking holes in it.
We have had millions, literally, millions and millions of chickens, pigs, cows, fed over the last 15 years on genetically modified corn. How did we not see any of this? So there are these single studies that come out that cause you to think, but you have to look at it in the overall context. How likely is it that that single study has found something that all the 200 others have missed? Or is it more likely that there's something fishy going on with that study? That's why in science we never look at single studies. It's always a compendium of information.
How widespread are genetically modified or genetically engineered ingredients in the foods that we buy? For example, let's say I'm wheeling my shopping cart through the grocery store. Give me an idea of the types of food items that contain genetically engineered ingredients that I might not be aware of?
Well, first of all, it's impossible to know because thanks to lobbying by Monsanto and other companies, there's no requirement that any food product be labeled as to whether it contains GMOs or not.
I was always against that. I said, label it, say enhanced by genetic technology or whatever. Let people know what you're talking about. Because as soon as you try to distract, then people become suspicious. Why aren't you telling me everything? There was no reason not to tell. There's nothing, no secrets here. I think it's an enhanced technology that doesn't need to be hidden.
They do plan to replace nature. Monsanto's own consultant from a company no longer in business called Arthur Andersen admitted in 1999 that the executives in Monsanto described their ideal future in 15 to 20 years as a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented.
Are there any differences between genetically engineered foods and organic?
There have been numerous studies made that show that small family farms and small holders are something like 20 to 40% more efficient than large factory farms. But there have been many studies done showing that there is no economic penalty, at least not a substantial one, to raising organic crops.
Currently, we produce more food per person than any time in human history. And according to the UN expert, we can feed 11.3 billion people today. In the developing world, if you apply sustainable agricultural techniques like organic, they have found that it can double yields.
Genetic modification is something that works in case of some crops for some situations in some places in the world. Elsewhere, there might be other approaches that work better. It is just one of the tools.
They do plan to replace nature. Monsanto's own consultant from a company no longer in business called Arthur Andersen admitted in 1999 that the executives in Monsanto described their ideal future in 15 to 20 years as a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And Andersen worked backwards from that goal to create the strategy and tactics to achieve it. Now, the biotech industry claims that it's feed the world, help the world, but insiders tell us that's pure PR spin.
We have a variety of nutritional issues around the world. We have roughly 2 million children who go blind every year because their diet is essentially rice, and rice contains very little beta-carotene, which is a natural precursor to vitamin A. Well, it has been possible through genetic modification to take a gene from the marigold plant, or indeed from corn, and insert that gene into the genome of rice. You can have a potato that has the nutritional benefits of broccoli without any detriment.
In fact, GMOs lower average yield. They cause more use of agricultural chemicals. They do not increase average farmer income, and they're not safe. And yet the biotech industry continues to repeat these myths in spite of it being false.
There is scientific studies that illustrate that the yields are very, very close. In some cases, like in drought conditions, even better in organics. We could really raise dramatically the level of organic production if we had more research dollars at the land-grant universities in North America and around the world. But also the food is more nutrient dense. So we might be able to create cheaper food in an industrial model, but it's inferior food.
It boils down to this: genetically engineered crops cannot be kept in one spot. They will spread inevitably. And this is probably the biggest danger that GE crops present to farmers. If a field is planted in GE alfalfa, every field for 5 miles around it will be contaminated in the first season. So if genetically modified alfalfa, corn, and soy are planted widely across the U.S. and Canada, eventually they will contaminate every farm field. And I'm not saying this lightly. I'm saying literally every farm field. which means no more organically grown food. It will be impossible to grow organic food because everyone's crop will be contaminated with GE organisms. Damage to kidneys, the damage to the liver, the damage to the heart that were uncovered in the University of Cayenne study. And we couldn't choose not to eat them because that would be the only food available.
We are at a key point now in the genetic engineering discussion. It can go either way. There's so much energy right now against GMOs brewing in the public that we could reach a tipping point of consumer rejection. The concern has expressed itself in a demand for labeling with the introduction of labeling bills in more than 20 states. If GMOs require labeling, then I believe that most companies would rather eliminate the GMOs rather than admit that they're using them. In the United States, most Americans say they would avoid GMOs if labeled. Now, even if we don't pass a labeling law, I am optimistic that there's enough consumer rejection, enough people avoiding GM brands, and that number is growing so significantly that it'll soon become a marketing liability for companies to continue to use them. If we don't, what they plan is the genetic engineering not only of the rest of the food supply in terms of plants, but also the animals. These are the imaginations of scientists gone wild who hope that they can receive some kind of royalties on their patents, and they don't think about the risks to human health or the environment.
If the growth of genetically modified organisms and genetically engineered seeds and crops continues at the present pace, paint me a picture of what the food industry or agriculture will look like in 10 or 20 years.
Well, first of all, there'll be no more organic industry. The reason for that is contamination, especially by alfalfa. If all crops everywhere in the country become contaminated by GE varieties, then you can no longer produce an organic product and advertise it as such. So the organic food industry would die and be gone. You could not produce livestock that would be labeled organic because all that livestock have been fed on animal feed genetically altered. And then we would expose ourselves to all of the problems connected with these crops. For example, the damage to kidneys, the damage to the liver, the damage to the heart, all of these things. And who knows, maybe a whole new crop of diseases and pathogens that we've not even heard of yet. And we couldn't choose not to eat because that would be the only food available.
We have seen this historically in many other instances. When some novel form of technology introduced, it is almost immediately opposed. We saw this with pasteurization. There were demonstrations in the street, very much like what we see today, about how pasteurization was destroying the nutritional qualities of milk, how it was going to affect the health of children, how novel allergies were going to develop. Exactly the same kind of arguments you see here. Yet pasteurization, of course, is has been one of the great technological advances. We saw the same thing when chlorination of water was introduced. We saw the same thing when fluoridation was introduced. We saw the same thing when microwave ovens were introduced. Anytime there's any novel technology, whether it be genetic modification, whether it be cell phones, you will have a degree of opposition to it. That's just human nature. People tend to be very suspicious of anything that's new. They like the old and what they think can be trusted. If I would have to make a prediction, I would say that 100 years from now, people will look back and they will say, I can't believe that these people were having these kind of arguments, that there was ever any issue talking about genetically modified corn, or by that time what it will be potatoes with enhanced cancer preventative properties. Because I can't believe that people were ever against that. The same way that now we say pasteurization, how could anyone have been against it?
One of the biggest controversies surrounding GMOs is labeling. Unlike other controversial foods like veal, trans fats, MSG, or artificial sweeteners, GMO ingredients in food are rarely, if ever, identified on the label. GMO opponents would like to see legislation requiring food manufacturers to label products containing genetically modified ingredients so that consumers can decide for themselves whether to consume GMO products. Predictably, companies like Monsanto are opposed to such a law, arguing that fewer regulations, not more, are required to ensure the health of the free marketplace. But a healthy free marketplace is also dependent upon an informed consumer. It's hard to argue we don't have an absolute right to know what exactly we're eating. Even if such a GMO food labeling bill was passed, the biotech industry, according to our GMO critics, has government bureaucrats and politicians in its hip pocket. And thus, it might be naive to think that corrupt politicians and bureaucrats wouldn't kill such legislation. I think many of us would agree governments are too big and too intrusive, but mandating honest, transparent labeling on the foods we eat is certainly one of the few legitimate applications of government regulatory power. And now I'd like to know what you think. You can contact me here at The Conspiracy Show through our website, theconspiracyshow.com. In the meantime, don't be afraid.